Usually when I stream, I always get questions from my audience like, "Hey Jag, what is your favorite Metal Gear game? What is your least favorite? Is there a Metal Gear game you prefer to play over the others? Is there one you hate?" Recently, I did a Metal Gear story marathon where I played every Metal Gear game I could get my hands on. I do this marathon every year to refresh my memory about the game and their stories. If you're interested to watch my marathon runs, you can check it out on my secondary YouTube channel. The link is in the description. So, I have decided to make a tier list, ranking and reviewing every Metal Gear game I have played, even the obscure ones like Metal Gear Solid Mobile on the Nokia Engage service. However, this list will exclude Metal Gear Acid, Acid 2, Portable Ops Plus, and Metal Gear Touch. I will explain why later in the video. What you are about to see is my personal opinion about every game in the series, and be warned, I have got some strong, even controversial opinions. We are going to rank every Metal Gear game based on the overall experience, and we will do this in order of release date. So, let's start with Metal Gear. Released in 1987, I would give this game a B rank. It came at a time where the norm in video games was to shoot anything on the screen that was not you. Games like Contra, Ikari Warriors, and Guerrilla Wars followed that formula. Then, Metal Gear released and flipped the script. Instead of attacking enemies, the game forced you to hide and sneak around the Outer Heaven Fortress. It was a weird concept back then, but it worked really well. The game had a Metroidvania style, where you would pick up items and weapons to access new areas. It is a style I really enjoy. However, as the first game in the series and only the second game Hideo Kojima ever made, the first being Penguin Adventure, Metal Gear wasn't without issues. One major issue was how cryptic it was. The original MSX version was so cryptic that you might needed a guide from a magazine to figure out what to do. Plus, the game was quite challenging for its time. Despite its flaws, it was still a fun experience. There's room for improvement, but that's why the game deserves a B. Keep in mind, the MSX version of Metal Gear was only released in Japan, Europe, and South America, where the MSX system was available. The United States did not have an MSX system, which is why Metal Gear was never released there. As a result, many people in the US weren't even aware of the game's existence, until the NES version came out. 3 months after the MSX version, the NES version of Metal Gear was released. Unfortunately, I have to give this one a D rank. Imagine the MSX version, but worse. You will get the NES version. This port was developed by a small team of 4 people, and Hideo Kojima was not involved. Sadly, what made the original game unique was missing here. There were also some baffling changes that did not make sense. For example, in the MSX version, you start the game swimming to building number 1. In the NES version, you begin by parachuting into the jungle, alongside 3 soldiers you never encounter again, and have to cut your way through to building number 1. The game also had a teleportation system by using the trucks to move around the game, which felt out of place. Some design choices were just strange, like how the body armor became completely useless due to how the game calculated damage from enemies. Another example is the compass. In the MSX version, you needed to cross the desert to reach building number 3. But in the NES version, you can use the trucks to get to building number 3 without ever needing the compass. There were so many odd design choices that didn't make sense. I think the reason the NES version ended up being far inferior to the original MSX version is because it was rushed. Like I said, this version was released 3 months later and developed by such a small team. Although the game does have some redeeming qualities, but these aren't enough to make it a B or even a C tier game. So, a D feels appropriate. Despite its shortcomings, the NES version sold over 1 million copies in the United States. It was a massive success. This made Konami immediately greenlit a sequel. However, Hideo Kojima wasn't even aware that a sequel was in development until a co-worker told him on a train that they were working on it. And that sequel is Snake's Revenge. I would give Snake's Revenge a C. It is definitely better than the NES version of Metal Gear, but not quite good enough to rank as high as the original Metal Gear. One of the positives is that it is much more polished than the previous NES game. It is a big step forward, with more weapons, more items, more areas, and an amazing soundtrack. It had everything you would expect from a typical NES sequel. But despite these improvements, some bad design choices hold the game back. For example, the side-scrolling sections. In these parts of the game, you are forced to confront enemies head-on, which doesn't make sense for a stealth game where the main objective is to sneak and avoid confrontation. It feels like Konami added these sections in response to the popularity of Contra, but it defeats the purpose of Metal Gear as a stealth game. Then there's the brutal difficulty, which doesn't make any sense at all. The game is unnecessarily hard. Enemies have crazy accuracy, and the bosses are ridiculously tough. Just look at the first boss, the footballers. How could a kid back then avoid taking damage from them, especially when they deal 2 points of damage per hit? Or the second boss, with its endless grenade attacks that deal 4 points of damage per hit. 2 hits and you're dead. The difficulty was just absurd and uncalled for. There was absolutely no reason for this game to be so difficult. Even Kojima was critical of the game's difficulty in interviews. I think the reason why the game was too difficult because it was part of Konami's strategy to combat the rental market in the US. Back then, games were expensive, and many people rented them for the weekend instead of buying them. I remember Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo costing $70 back in 1992. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $175 today. So, to prevent players from beating rented games too quickly, Konami made their games extremely difficult in the Western market. Unlike Japan, where games rentals were banned and even punishable by law in the 1980s and 1990s. I guess that's why Snake's Revenge was never released there. Now, to be clear, a hard game isn't inherently bad. As long as the difficulty is fair, serves a purpose, and is done for good reasons, it is fine. Unfortunately, Snake's Revenge is hard for all the wrong reasons. If the game had tuned down the difficulty and dropped the side-scrolling sections, it could have been a great classic Metal Gear game. But as it stands, it's a C-tier game. After learning about Snake's Revenge, Hideo Kojima was not amused, and he immediately began working on a true sequel to Metal Gear. And that true sequel is Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. If you were to ask me, hey Jag, what is your favorite 2D Metal Gear game? I would say without a doubt Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. This game is an easy A. For a 2D game released in 1990, it is incredibly well made. Only someone as talented as Hideo Kojima could have created it. The story, the gameplay, the bosses and the music are all top-notch, a complete premium package. It is an amazing game by 1990s standards. It saddens me that this game was never released outside of Japan, unlike the first game. That's my only issue with it. It was a Japan exclusive game. The only way to play it for years was by either owning a Japanese MSX2 or through emulation, or the 2006 release of Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. Imagine the impact it would have had if it had been released worldwide back then, to something like the Super Nintendo. Who knows, maybe in another timeline. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is a phenomenal game, and I truly appreciate the work Kojima put into it. It is amazing, from start to finish. Next up is Metal Gear Solid, which is what most of us consider to be our first true experience with the series. Almost everyone I know started their Metal Gear journey with this game. Released on the PlayStation in 1998, it was revolutionary in nearly every aspect of the video game entertainment industry, and for that alone, it deserves an easy S-tier rating. This was the first 3D Metal Gear game. It came at a time when video games were still seen as children's toy. People didn't take video games seriously. Back then, the best story and voice acting you could find in games was something akin to like Jill Sandwich from Resident Evil.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill Sandwich.
You're right.
Then Metal Gear Solid came in and elevated video games as a medium to new heights, with an amazing story, superb voice acting, and cinematic presentation that could rival movies. The gameplay was groundbreaking for 1998. Sure, it feels a bit outdated now, but back then it was revolutionary. I still consider Metal Gear Solid to be the best PlayStation game ever made. It had everything. If Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake was the full premium package, then Metal Gear Solid was the ultimate collector's edition, crafted specifically for true video game enthusiasts. However, despite how great this game is, it does have a few issues. For example, the unnecessary backtracking, which was a way to stretch out the game's length artificially. And this leads me to my next issue. Metal Gear Solid is a short game. Unlike Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, which felt rich in content, Shadow Moses felt a bit hollow at times. I have heard the game was meant to be longer, but it was shortened for quality purposes, which might have been for the best overall. Regardless, Metal Gear Solid is one of the best video games of all time, and a defining moment in my life as well. It marked the start of my love for the series, and I am so glad I was able to experience it when it was released back in 1998. Not only that, but a year later, VR Missions was released, adding over 300 missions, which increased the game's value even more. Next up is a game that wasn't created by Hideo Kojima. Released for a handheld system, the Game Boy Color. That game is Metal Gear Ghost Babel, known simply as Metal Gear Solid in the West. This is another A-tier game. Remember when I said Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is my favorite 2D Metal Gear game of all time? Well, coming in right behind it is Metal Gear Ghost Babel. Ghost Babel is an incredibly ambitious game, especially when you consider it was released on a Game Boy Color. What the developers were able to achieve on such a limited system is nothing short of remarkable. The game features a great story, excellent gameplay, well-designed levels, memorable bosses and villains with fleshed-out backstories, rich codec calls, and even anime-style cutscenes. There are also VR missions and a multiplayer mode, where you can play with friends by linking multiple Game Boy Colors. And all of this was packed into a small handheld system you can put in your pocket. The only issue I have with the game is the limited controls, which is due to the Game Boy Color's lack of buttons. It is not terrible, but it takes time to get used to. If you are a big fan of the Metal Gear franchise and haven't played Ghost Babel, do yourself a favor and try it out. It is an amazing game. Hopefully it will be included in the Master Collection Volume 2 or 3. Alright, now we move into the PlayStation 2 with a game that I consider the best Metal Gear game ever. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, released in November 2001. If you ask me what my favorite Metal Gear game is, it is this one, and that make it an easy S-tier game. The story is so incredible that I don't think we will ever see anything like it again. The gameplay was buttery smooth, running at 60 FPS on the PlayStation 2, which was quite unique for its time. The graphics were mind-blowing back then, and the game really showed what next-gen games would look like. It perfectly demonstrated the massive leap in quality between PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. Most people, myself included, bought the game because of how amazing it looked, and I am not gonna lie, I was blown away by it. The game is nearly perfect, though not quite 10 out of 10, more like a 9.8 out of 10, because it does have some issues. One of them is the surprise introduction of Raiden, a character we didn't know would be the main protagonist until the game's release. While I understand the reasoning behind playing as Raiden, I wasn't a fan of how we were tricked into it. The base game didn't include VR missions like the original Metal Gear Solid. But a year later, Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance was released with tons of extra content. This version had over 500 VR missions, Snake Tales, Boss Rush mode, and even skateboarding mode. And that's why I consider Metal Gear Solid 2 the best Metal Gear game of all time, and one of the best video games ever created. A year later, Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto from Nintendo approached Hideo Kojima at Konami requesting a Metal Gear game for the GameCube. Following the critical and commercial success of Resident Evil Remake on the system, Kojima and Konami jumped at the opportunity and decided to remake Metal Gear Solid. Konami approved the project, and Silicon Knights was chosen to develop the game. In March 2004, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes was released. Unfortunately, unlike Resident Evil Remake, the game fell short of its potential and ultimately delivered a lackluster experience. The core issue with the Twin Snakes is that they used the Metal Gear Solid 2 engine to remake the original Metal Gear Solid, but made minimal changes to the level design and gameplay. The engine itself wasn't the problem, It is that the developer did not make the necessary adjustments to the levels to accommodate the new mechanics that were introduced in Metal Gear Solid 2. This resulted in somewhat a broken experience. Many of the original game's charming moments were diminished due to this. For example, in the tank hangar, if you come from the air vent in the second floor, you can reach the elevator without navigating the entire area, by using the hanging mechanic and dropping straight to the first floor. Another example is the blast furnace, which was once a tense and a scary section where you had to avoid a crane to avoid falling into molten lava, become this. Or you can do this and avoid 70% of the area. The suspense and eerie atmosphere of Shadow Moses was completely lost. The boss fights were also affected. For instance, look at the Ocelot fight on extreme difficulty. This is how easy it is to defeat him now.
Hiding won't help. You're pretty good. Just what I'd expect from the man with the same code as the boss.
And then there are the cutscene. The over-the-top, Matrix-style cutscenes feel out of place and clash with the overall tone of the game and the series. The interesting thing is that these cutscenes were actually demanded by Kojima. The cinematic director for the Twin Snakes, Ryohei Kitamura, wanted to stay faithful to the original material, but Kojima insisted on something more original, which led to these wild scenes. Unfortunately, this extra creativity left a bad taste in many fans' mouths. Despite these issues, the game does have some charm. Speedrunning the game is actually fun, thanks to several quality of life improvements. But from a casual perspective, the game is not great, and honestly, I don't entirely blame the developers. According to some reports, the Twin Snakes was developed in just 10 months. The developers wanted more time to add features like VR missions, but they couldn't because Konami demanded the game to be finished and released by March 2004, before the end of the fiscal year, as Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was slated for release later that year. As a result, the Twin Snakes was released with a lot of issues, from gameplay problems to bugs and glitches. One issue that personally bothered me was the dead zone problem in the controls, which frustrated me so much that I stopped speedrunning the game because of it. Overall, the remake failed to capture the essence of the original. The genius design of the original Metal Gear Solid was shattered in the Twin Snakes, and much of its charm was lost. That's why I'm giving it a C. I would rate it lower, but C seems to be appropriate. Next up is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Released on November 2004, this is a game that many fans hold in high regards. Some even consider it the best game in the series and the finest entry in the franchise. So you would think this would be an S-tier game for me, right? Well, to be honest, no. For me, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is an A-tier game. This is a really good game. It was developed by Hideo Kojima and released for the PlayStation 2. The story is emotionally engaging, the gameplay is great, the cinematography is top-notch, the music and level design are excellent, and the overall experience is unforgettable. It is definitely a game that will stay in your memory for a long time. However, despite all of that, the game doesn't offer enough to deserve an S-tier rating. Let me explain. One of my main issues is that the game is too linear. Remember when I said the original Metal Gear had a Metroidvania style? That style gave you a sense of exploration, enhancing the sneaking and stealth aspects of the game by allowing you to return to older areas with different enemy layouts. It is something I really appreciate in the earlier Metal Gear games. Unfortunately, this style is absent in Metal Gear Solid 3. The game is very linear. You just go from point A to point B. Occasionally, you can deviate into sub-areas to find weapons and equipment, but that's about it. Unlike in Metal Gear Solid, for example, in the same area where you fight Ocelot, there is a wall you can destroy with C4. Inside, there are 2 level 4 keycard doors, which you can access once you get the keycard from Arakan. If you backtrack to the door, you will find a camera, which you can use to take pictures and save in your memory card. This kind of backtracking, which rewards your curiosity, is something I love. It adds depth to the game. Unfortunately, this feeling is missing in Metal Gear Solid 3 due to its linearity. Another issue I have is the camouflage system. It is a great and unique idea, but the execution falls short. The fact that you have to constantly pause the game to equip the right camouflage for your surroundings become tedious, especially on higher difficulties where enemies can easily spot you from a distance. Plus, the slow load times of the PlayStation 2 hardware makes it even more annoying. There's also a pacing issues, and the backstories of some members of the Cobra units are lacking, compared to the depth given to previous Metal Gear villains. And this leads me to my next point. The game has a lot of cut content. In an interview, Kojima mentioned that only 60% of his ideas made it into the game. For example, Kojima was forced to remove cutscenes that were finished, but couldn't be included because the PlayStation 2 disc size was insufficient. I know that cut content is something that happens in games and movies all the time, but knowing that the game could have been even more than it was, does keep me up at night sometimes. A year later, Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence was released. It added a multiplayer mode, the original Metal Gear, and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. They also added quality of life improvements like a free camera and extra camouflage options. But even with these additions, it wasn't enough to push the game to S tier for me. That being said, it doesn't undermine how important Metal Gear Solid 3 was for the video game industry. Like I said, it is one of the best Metal Gear games. But I feel like the game is a victim of its time. It had the potential to be much more, but the PlayStation 2 hardware and time constraints shackled it from reaching its full potential. This is where remakes comes in. But unfortunately, it looks like Konami decided to keep those shackles on and let the game walk on the floor instead of flying. So for now, it will be an A tier game. In December 2006, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops was released for PSP. In my opinion, this is a B tier game. It is a sequel to Metal Gear Solid 3, taking place 6 years later. Unfortunately, the game suffers from few issues that keeps it from being higher. First, I would like to mention that being a PSP game isn't inherently a problem, but the problem is that the game itself wasn't fully optimized for the PSP hardware. They have used a watered-down Metal Gear Solid 3 engine with a free camera instead of a fixed camera, which resulted to lower the frame rate in the game to 20 FPS, making the experience very jarring. The free camera also made the controls clunky, and combined with the low frame rate, it made playing the game a less enjoyable experience. But those are my only real complaints. The rest of the game is fantastic. The story is great, and the mechanics of recruiting soldiers and sending them on missions to gather intel and supplies is a neat idea. You build your own small army, which fits perfectly with Big Boss's persona as a leader. This concept inspired Kojima to further explore the Metal Gear universe, and thanks to Portable Ops, we eventually got Peace Walker, Ground Zeroes, and the Phantom Pain. But despite all these positives, the game technical issues keep it at a B tier. In 2007, a Metal Gear game was quietly announced, and because of that, many people don't even know it exists. I learned about the game purely by accident. This game is called Metal Gear Solid Mobile, and it was released for the Nokia N-Gage service in early 2008. Yes, there was a Metal Gear game for Nokia phones. From what I know, the game was only available through specific mobile providers in the United States, and you had to be a subscriber to access the game. I didn't play it when it first came out. I only played it for the first time in 2021. I had to buy a Nokia N95, jailbreak it, and inject the game files just so I could play it and stream it for you guys. I did a story playthrough and even a speedrun of it. If you are interested in seeing what the game looks like, I will link a video in the description below. As for my rating, I would give it a B. For what it is, a game on a Nokia phone, it is pretty impressive. The game file is only 3 MB, which is tiny for a 3D game, yet it has a lot of content. The story is decent and takes place between Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 during Snakes and Otacons philanthropy days. The game introduces some neat ideas, like using your phone's camera to take pictures of real-world objects and use their colors for camouflage. The game also includes VR missions. The amount of content in this game reminds me of what Ghost Babel did for the Game Boy Color. However, the gameplay is limited to 4-directional movement. The graphics aren't great, the frame rate is poor, and the sound quality is low. But for 3 MB mobile game, that's understandable. Because it is so obscure, many people don't even know it exists. If you have the chance, give this game a try. There's even an emulator for it now. If Konami wanted to be generous and score more marks of their redemption arc, they should remaster this game, just like they did with Haunted Castle Remix in the Castlevania Dominus collection. For what it is, Metal Gear Solid Mobile delivers, so I'm giving it a B. On June 12, 2008, Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots was released. I would give this game an A. Unfortunately, it doesn't offer enough to deserve an S. Metal Gear Solid 4 was one of the most anticipated games of all time, being a PlayStation 3 exclusive and widely believed to be the finale of the saga. The hype and anticipation for the game were immense, comparable to the excitement surrounding Metal Gear Solid 2. I, like many others, couldn't wait for the release. In fact, I took a week off from work just to enjoy this game without distractions. The game was good, but the story felt a bit lackluster, which is uncharacteristic of Hideo Kojima. I think the story ended up this way because Kojima was forced to make a sequel to Metal Gear Solid 2, and as a result, he crafted a narrative that aligned with fans' expectations. He even changed the original ending that he intended for the game. Kojima just gave fans what they wanted, but sometimes that is not the best approach, and the story of Metal Gear Solid 4 reflects this. At the very least, the game did wrap up Solid Snake's stories in the best possible way. Many other video games, TV shows, and movies have failed to give their characters a proper send-off, but Metal Gear Solid 4 succeeded in that regard, and I appreciate that. One of the glaring issues I have with the game is the excessive number of cutscenes. The ratio between cutscenes and gameplay is very off. You play for 5 minutes, then get a 15-minute cutscene. This patterns continue throughout the entire game. I don't mind cutscenes, but Metal Gear Solid 4 takes it too far. The experience feels more like a movie with some gameplay segments rather than a game with cinematic cutscenes. When you do get to play, the gameplay is fantastic, but you really only get to experience it in its full glory during Act 1 and Act 2. From Act 3 onward, the game takes a nosedive and starts to lose its way. The game loses focus on what it wants to be, especially after the strong start of Act 1 and 2. With Act 4 being mostly a nostalgic trip, and Act 5 is essentially a 2-hour movie. The war economy concept is interesting, but the game doesn't give you enough opportunities to experiment with it. In the end, the game has undeniable potential, but it often chooses to be a movie rather than a game. Let's not forget about Metal Gear Online. I had some fond memories of it, and it is a shame the official servers were shut down in 2012. However, you can still play using custom servers through the Safe MGO community. Shoutouts to them for keeping Metal Gear Online alive. Despite all of that, the game is good, and I like it, but it is not enough to make it an S-tier game for me. To be honest, it barely deserves an A, maybe more like a B+ or A-, but for now, let's keep it at A. In 2010, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker was released for the PSP. Unfortunately, I would rate this game a B, and here's why. Remember the issues I had with portable ops like the free camera, bad controls, an awful frame rate at 20 FPS? Well, those issues still exist in Peace Walker, and unfortunately, these problems impacted Peace Walker even more than they did with portable ops. The reason is, portable ops had a contained atmosphere. It was a PSP game with a simple side story. It wasn't meant to be something as big as the other main games in the series. However, Peace Walker was a whole different story. It was developed by Hideo Kojima himself and is super important to the Metal Gear saga. Kojima even said Peace Walker was basically Metal Gear Solid 5 due to its importance. Now, the thing that baffles me is, Kojima has always been the type to push for the best and the latest technologies in his video games, and he is known for complaining about hardware limitations. He even felt the PlayStation 3 wasn't powerful enough to fully realize his vision. So the fact that he decided to make his next big Metal Gear game on the PSP, a way less powerful system compared to the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 or even PC, is just wild to me. And because Kojima is so ambitious, the game ended up being held back by the PSP's limitations. And honestly, I believe putting Peace Walker on the PSP was probably Kojima's biggest mistake in the series. The game definitely deserved to be on a more powerful hardware. And as a result, the game's true potential was really held back. I mean, have you ever seen a Metal Gear game where you can't crawl?
However, you cannot move while you are lying down. I'll say that again. You cannot move while lying down. Is that clear?
Since Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, every game in the series has let you crawl, but not in Peace Walker. Seriously, what kind of a soldier doesn't know how to crawl? It just feels off. I know it is a design choice and the game makes fun of it, but why is it even a design choice to begin with? Unless it is one of those limitations that really shows how the PSP held back the game. Another issue I have is the storytelling. The majority of the story is delivered through cassette tapes, with only major cutscenes using Ashley Wood's artwork. To fully understand the story, you need to listen to these tapes, and they are long, ridiculously long. It is estimated that listening to all the tapes in the game would take around 7 hours. Of course, you don't have to listen to every single one of them, but a lot of them are crucial to the plot. Some key details, like how Kaz and Big Boss first met, are buried in these tapes. Kojima likely intended for players to listen to them during breaks or while traveling, but personally, I didn't enjoy this method of storytelling. The gameplay is also problematic. You control the camera with the D-pad or the face buttons, and you have to deal with the terrible frame rate as well. The controls were so bad that Kojima and Konami had to license the control scheme from Monster Hunter games, plus other stuff. Also, the boss encounters are disappointing. You are mostly fighting tanks, helicopters, and AI machines. The unique boss encounters from previous games are absent here. However, the story is excellent, no complaints there. The game is rich in content, from managing Mother Base and recruiting soldiers to completing various side ops and missions. It also had multiplayer mode, and you can also swap soldiers with friends. The game has a lot of potential, but the PSP held back that potential. Thankfully, a year later, the game was released as part of the HD collection on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, with better controls and smooth 60 FPS. But that didn't fix all the issues. What the game really needs is a full-on remake. Hopefully, it is Konami's next project after Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. So, I give Peace Walker a B. I want to rate it lower, like a C, but the game is rich in content and the story is amazing. It would be unfair to rate it any lower than B. And before I wrap up this segment, I know why Kojima released Peace Walker on the PSP. At the time, handheld gaming was huge. The Nintendo DS and PSP were selling like crazy, and I am sure Konami and Sony pushed Kojima to make a Metal Gear game for the PSP. I don't think Kojima had much of a choice in the matter. Still, I can't hide my frustration. This game deserved better. Damn it, Kojima. Why did you have to release this on PSP? You are one of the most ambitious individuals in the industry, always working with the best technologies and the best hardware. Just why? Released by Platinum Games in 2013, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance started development as Metal Gear Solid Rising in 2009 by Kojima Productions. But the project stalled and development shifted to Platinum Games. Within 2 years, they created something exceptional. In my opinion, this is an A-tier game. What can I say about this game that hasn't been already said? The impact Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance had on both the hack-and-slash genre and the gaming industry as a whole is unlike anything I have ever seen from a spin-off. Typically, spin-offs don't carry the same weight as the main series. They are usually just fun side stories, but what Rising: Revengeance achieved, that's something worth studying and teaching. How is it that a spin-off could leave such a lasting mark, to the point where people are still talking about it today? That is something I will never fully understand. Ever since the game was released back in 2013, this game continues to be relevant to this day. People still make memes about it. If you want to know how cult following are born, look no further than Rising Revengeance. And the fact that Konami hasn't capitalized on this popularity is a massive missed opportunity. However, there are two things I didn't like about the game, which prevent me from giving it an S. First, the length. The game is very short. My most recent playthrough took me about 8 hours to complete, and that was only my third time playing it. The first time was in 2013, and the second time was 3 years ago in 2021. For me, that's pretty short. Second, pre-rendered in-engine cutscenes are in 720p at 30 FPS, making them jarring and blurry. If this game gets a remastered, I hope they fix that. I don't care how, it just needs to be done. There is also another issue, but this is a personal one. I don't enjoy hack and slash games. I find them boring, but that doesn't stop me from recognizing the impact this game had on the industry. So, an A tier rating seems suitable for this game. When Hideo Kojima was developing the Fox engine, he wanted to give us a taste of what he was working on. He announced 2 Metal Gear games, Metal Gear Solid V Ground Zeroes and Metal Gear Solid V The Phantom Pain. Ground Zeroes was released first in March 2014, intended as an introduction, a prologue to be exact. However, fans weren't happy, seeing the game as nothing more than a paid demo due to its limited content. The game was very short. The main mission took about an hour to complete, and the side missions ranged between 15 to 20 minutes each. So in total, you could experience everything the game had to offer in around 3 to 4 hours. For many fans, this simply didn't justify the price. And this brings us to another issue, the pricing. Ground Zeroes was sold for $30 digitally on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, with the physical version priced at $40. Quite expensive considering the content. At the time, full retail games were priced at $60, so many fans felt shortchanged. This created a lot of bad sentiment, and most players decided to wait for the Phantom Pain to release, hoping Konami would bundle both games together, which they eventually did. As for the gameplay itself, it is good, but it feels unpolished. One of my main issues was the shooting mechanics, the shooting trajectory to be specific. Firing a gun in Ground Zeroes felt more like using a slingshot than an actual firearm. It was highly inaccurate and didn't make much sense. I am not sure if they were aiming for realism and ended up overdoing it, but landing headshots with the tranquilizer gun was frustrating. No matter how precise you tried to be, there was about an 80% chance you would miss the headshot. Because of these issues, I would rate the game a B. It is a good game, but the problems soured my experience. A year and a half later, Metal Gear Solid V The Phantom Pain was released. I still remember the date, September 1st, 2015. But 7 months before the game's release, we got the devastating news that Hideo Kojima would be leaving Konami due to conflicts with management. We all know the fiasco that happened between them, and I won't go into details here. However, it is important to briefly mention because it had a big impact on the Phantom Pain. As for the game itself, the Phantom Pain offers the best gameplay in the entire series. All of the gameplay issues from Ground Zeroes were fixed. Controlling Snake and the shooting mechanics felt fantastic, and sneaking through enemy-filled areas had never been more satisfying. Given that this was Hideo Kojima's final game in the franchise, people were hyped, expecting it to be his last masterpiece. Unfortunately, the game didn't meet expectations, and that's because it was released in an unfinished state, which significantly affected the overall experience. I have made a video discussing why the Phantom Pain is incomplete, and I will link that video in the description below. Because the game is incomplete, I shouldn't even review or rate this game at all, but I will give it an A, thanks to the addictive, amazing gameplay it offers. And now for Metal Gear Survive. Oh boy, before I even talk about this game, it is important to mention a key detail. Metal Gear Survive actually started as a DLC concept for the Phantom Pain. In a 2013 interview, Hideo Kojima expressed interest in making a zombie game. He considered adding it as a DLC for the Phantom Pain, similar to how Red Dead Redemption had its Undead Nightmare DLC. So, what did Konami do? They took this concept and some early work on the zombie DLC and turned it into a full-fledged retail game. And this in itself broke the game in a way that are hard to imagine. Metal Gear Survive is bad. Really, really bad. Even though it's a spin-off, the experience was incredibly frustrating. The game leaned heavily into survival mechanics like scavenging for food, water, and crafting materials. Now, that's fine for what the game is all about, which is survive, but it was executed in a way that felt tedious, frustrating, and overly grindy. The repetitive gameplay loop of the base defense against waves of zombie-like enemies lacked the depth and strategy Metal Gear fans had come to expect. The story was weak and uninspired. While not directly connected to the main series, it failed to offer anything compelling in terms of world building or character development. To make matters worse, the game had some pretty annoying microtransactions. Also, charging players for extra save slots? For $10 each? In 2018? Who the f thought this was a good idea? The game felt like a hollow experience, lacking the creativity, atmosphere, and polish that even spin-offs like Metal Gear Rising had. Survive didn't just diverge from the core series, it failed to deliver a satisfying experience on its own merits. Also, let's not forget the false marketing this game got. We were tricked into thinking this game would be mainly a cooperative experience. Although it had cooperative mode where you can play with your friends, it was just a side mode and not as it was advertised as it being integrated into the main game. And that's why I'm giving this game an F. And here it is, my review and rating for every Metal Gear game that I have played. I haven't reviewed or rated Metal Gear Acid 1 and Metal Gear Acid 2 because I haven't played enough of either games to give a proper review. The issue is that these two games play very differently from the rest of the series, and because of that, I never really got into them deeply. To be honest, I don't fully understand them. To explain my point, it is like asking a soccer fan to watch and critique a hockey game. I just don't know enough about it to provide a fair review, and that's why I'm not rating them. As for Portable Ops Plus, I haven't played it at all. All I know is that it is an extended version of the original Portable Ops with added modes, and that's about it. So, I won't be rating that one either. Same thing applies with Metal Gear Touch. I did not play Touch, so I don't know much. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the series and my personal takes on each game. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up. And tell me in the comments, what is your favorite Metal Gear game? And how would you rank them? Looking forward to your responses. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.